For those that don't know, there is currently a debate on whether we should nationalize the U.S. freight railroads or not. Personally, I think it's a bad idea for a few reasons. Which is what I'll explain here. This is why nationalizing the U.S. freight railroads is a terrible idea. Reason number 1. The people that will run the U.S. nationalized freight railroad. As I'm sure everyone that has more than 2 brain cells will know, a politician cannot effectively run a railroad. And this nationalized U.S. freight railroad is going to be run by politicians, which would mean that the politicians who have no experience when running a railroad will probably be thinking, how the hell am I going to run this railroad, or something similar to that. This is a recipe. This is a near recipe for disaster, and it's gonna get a little bit more worse. Reason number 2, monopoly of railroading. I think we all know that the 4 class 1s that are headquartered in the U.S. They form a duopoly on each coast of the U.S. Why turn all 4 of them and the various short lines in class 2s into a single countrywide monopoly? For those that don't know, when you're a monopoly, there's no incentive to compete, and there's no incentive to compete or innovate. Okay. And that is going to lead to can lead to several things, which are highlighted in the next reason. Reason number 3, funding. This nationalized U.S. freight railroad is going to require taxpayer dollars to fund it, because it's run by the government. This should go to the railroads. However, most likely, instead of going to the railroads, it might go towards funding highways or our way too funded military. And I don't think we want our military having that much more money, dear God. But anyways, this lack of funding towards this underfunding towards the freight railroad would lead to locomotive is being retired, maintenance, all but the most basic maintenance being cut away, which can lead to several derailments, and layoffs will occur. Even if you were to just nationalize the rails themselves and not the actual railroads, you're still going to have the maintenance problem. And it's going to, soon enough, we're going to have a repeat of these 5 railroads. And I don't really want that. Reason number 4, socialism. Socialism, for those that don't know, is a halfway point between capitalism and communism. Nationalizing the U.S. freight railroads promotes socialism, which itself, in a way, promotes communism. And believe me, no one wants a communist or socialist U.S. Reason number 5, the federal government's relation to the railroads. Remember how Amtrak and Conrail were formed by the federal government. We all know that. However, the only reason why the federal government had to form these 2 railroads was because when they formed the ICC in 1887, it was originally meant to regulate the railroads so that there wouldn't be any monopolies or tycoons. By the 1950s, their policies were becoming outdated. And and it hit a boiling point when Penn Central went bankrupt on June 21st of 1970. Then, this led to the creation of Amtrak on May 1st, 1971, and Conrail on April 1st, 1976. However, the only reason why these were created was because the federal government had failed the railroads. If there were to be a nationalized freight railroad created, it will most likely be because the federal government failed. Most likely be when the federal government fails the railroads again. However, despite all these reasons, the last reason I have should probably hammer home the point on its own that nationalizing the U.S. railroads is a bad idea. Reason number 6. Railroad unions. You think the current class ones bust the unions? Believe me, it's probably going to be a lot worse under nationalization. This is because of the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. This pretty much made it illegal for employees of the federal government to go on strike. If we were to nationalize these 4 railroads, the federal railroaders would become federal government employees, and thus they would fall under the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. Thus, they won't be able to strike legally if there are bad working conditions, if the conditions of their jobs start to deteriorate, which they probably will. Did I forget to mention that this is also a felony? If you go on strike, you're going to get fired and not be able to work for the federal government again, and there's probably some other shit that I don't know. I tried looking it up and I didn't find anything else other than you're going to lose your job and not be able to work for the federal government again. But also, if conditions on the railroad, if the railroaders are facing horrible working conditions under this federal government railroad, which they probably will, the U.S. government is pretty much telling them, tough stuff, deal with it. If this alone doesn't convince many of you that nationalizing the U.S. railroads is a bad idea, I don't know what will. But anyways, thank you for listening to me. If you think that we should if you still think at the end of this that we should nationalize the railroads, but this has helped you realize the problems with it, then at least you recognize that there are flaws that we need to deal with before we can even consider nationalizing. These were just my opinions, and I hope you enjoyed listening to them.